Ohio was very much bought into testing. When we talked to the folks at the State Department of Education, they just believe very strongly that they're creating good tests and that it's giving good information, and they really have a difficult time seeing the counter argument that perhaps the methods being used to make these tests are not that good, and perhaps the data that's coming from them doesn't tell you very much about kids. So it's a difficult. It's difficult to get anybody to listen to the counter arguments in Ohio, to be frank. The thing about No Child Left Behind is that it is very dependent on proficiency or standardized test data. And what we found in our study is the industry is just simply not up to the task yet of providing the kind of data that will give you good information about kids and about schools and about school districts and how everybody's performing. When we looked in depth at how the actual tests are created, we found extreme problems with giving a fair representation of how kids are doing. Here's the bottom line problem. Test creation in this country has evolved largely from the IQ. The IQ and the SAT and standardized testing through the years has had a primary goal of sorting kids out. A test like the SAT, what they want to know, or achievement tests that we took as kids, like the California Achievement Test or the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, what those tests want to say is they're trying to tell you who are the most intelligent kids and who are the kids who are having the most difficulty and who are the kids in the middle. And in order to have a test give you that information, you have to stylize it in such a way that there are lots of tricky questions so that you hopefully get sort of the high IQ kids. The kids who are good at solving those kinds of puzzles and those kinds of tricks tend to get the high scores. There are not going to be very many kids who solve the really hardest questions on an SAT or an Iowa Test of Basic Skills. And that's what the test creators want. They want a small number of kids at the top, a small number of kids at the bottom, and a lot of kids in the middle. Sometimes you hear this called the bell-shaped curve. There's nothing wrong with creating a test like that. It does give you information about kids. It will tell you what kids have tremendous strengths, and it will tell you what kids have major deficiencies, and it can help a teacher figure out how to address those. What's dangerous is when you take a test that's created like that and say all kids should be able to pass this test. The test is specifically designed so that all kids cannot pass. Now, as we've gone on to the era of No Child Left Behind, we're asking a test industry that's created mostly tests as I described through the years. We're asking them to now create tests that tell us, is a kid proficient? Has that kid learned the material? And this is proving to be a very hard transition for the testing industry because they rely on the methods they've been using for years and years and years. When they create tests for Ohio that are supposed to be criterion reference, they call it. It's supposed to test, did the kid learn the set of information? They're still using these techniques. They're still creating a small number of test questions that are very difficult and only a few kids will pass, and a small number that are very easy that everybody's going to get right. And when you see the score results, they come out as the curve. And that's what the test creators want. And in fact, Ohio is telling them to make the tests that way. They're telling them that we want score spread, that's called. The results are put into 5 categories. And in Ohio, if they could get 20% in each category, from advanced all the way down to below basic, that would be ideal. That's what they'd like to see. The problem is, we're taking that kind of test and we're making a judgment about a kid who ends up in below basic, the lowest level. Can that kid read? If you score below basic on a 3rd grade reading test, does that mean you cannot read? Researchers we talked to said it absolutely does not mean that. The reading tests are a great example. We spoke to researchers from Columbia University who've done in-depth study on reading tests for elementary school kids. What they found was they went into their study saying, how can we make these tests better? They were hoping to find through their research, through talking to kids and their experience taking the test, new methods that test creators could use to make tests that did a better job of telling us if kids read. Their ultimate conclusion of their research was these tests should be stopped, that they absolutely should not administer these sorts of reading comprehension tests to elementary school children, because the methods used to create those reading tests can't really tell you whether the kid can read or not. There's a great example in our series of a test question from a standardized test. It's taken from Through the Looking Glass. in the question, Alice from the story encounters a fawn. And I don't remember the exact wording, but essentially Alice approaches the fawn and says, "Here then, here then," with an exclamation point. And the fawn looks at her, it says, with wide eyes. As she reaches out her hand, the fawn steps back a little and stares at her. And that's essentially the whole passage. It's just a few words, okay? Two questions on that. One were, what was the fawn's reaction? And one of the incorrect answers is the fawn is frightened of Alice. In the actual passage, it states that the fawn did not appear frightened, but stepped back a little and stared at Alice. What they found in interviewing the kids was, even though it states right in the text that the fawn does not appear frightened, kids who knew something about wild animals knew that you can't pet a wild animal. So they interpreted the animal's reaction of stepping back and looking with wide eyes as fear. A very plausible thing for a fourth grade kid or third grade kid to understand about that passage, and yet that's the wrong answer. So the question we had for the researchers is, if I read that passage and I choose that wrong answer because I know something about wild animals, you're doing what everybody does when they read. Everyone that when they reads reinterprets the text based on their experience. So they draw in things they know about the world to help understand the text better. This is what the kids are doing with the fawn. If I read that text and interpret it that the fawn is frightened because of what I know about wild animals, and then I choose that wrong answer, does that mean I could not read the text? And the researchers say, of course not. You did perfectly fine at reading it. You just simply fell for the wrong answer. It's these kind of tricky questions that make these tests bad predictors of what kids know and what they don't know.